The galaxy was a fractured expanse of competing interests, where the Galactic Council served more as a symbolic mediator than an effective governing body. Composed of representatives from hundreds of species, the Council's actions were mired in bureaucracy, self-interest, and political gridlock. It existed not to uphold justice but to maintain a tenuous balance of power, often at the expense of smaller, less influential civilizations. Amid this unstable framework, humanity emerged as a relatively new player. Having achieved interstellar travel only a few centuries prior, humans quickly gained recognition for their adaptability and rapid technological advancement. Yet their position in the Council was one of marginal influence, as older, more established species viewed them as upstarts. Despite this, humanity pursued diplomacy with patience and determination, seeking to build alliances and establish themselves as a stabilizing force in the galaxy. Humanity's diplomatic efforts often involved mediating disputes between rival factions, resolving trade disagreements, and proposing policies to curb the exploitation of weaker species. While these initiatives gained them allies among smaller civilizations, they were met with resistance from the more dominant members of the Council. To these powers, humanity's idealism was naive and disruptive to their carefully maintained hierarchies. Tensions in the galaxy worsened when a militaristic faction, an empire notorious for its expansionist policies and disregard for ethical considerations, began to escalate its aggression. This faction, emboldened by the Council's ineffectiveness, launched a series of incursions into neutral territories, subjugating entire populations and draining resources from weaker systems. Their actions disrupted trade routes, displaced millions, and destabilized entire regions. Initially, humanity sought to address these provocations through the Council, urging immediate action to counter the aggressors. Their representatives presented detailed evidence of the Empire's violations, calling for sanctions and a united military response. However, the Council's deliberations descended into endless debates. Established powers, unwilling to risk their own resources or alliances, argued for further diplomacy, while smaller species, fearful of retaliation, hesitated to support stronger measures. Frustrated but still committed to peaceful resolution, humanity continued to push for action, even as the situation worsened. Reports emerged of atrocities committed by the Empire, enslavement, environmental devastation, and the wholesale destruction of dissenting colonies. These acts, though condemned verbally by the Council, were met with no meaningful intervention. The Council's inaction emboldened the aggressors, who saw the lack of consequences as a green light to expand their campaigns. Humanity's patience was tested further when their own colonies became targets. The Empire launched attacks on human settlements, crippling infrastructure, and inflicting significant casualties. Despite the obvious provocation, the Council's response was tepid, with some representatives even suggesting that humanity should avoid retaliating to prevent escalating the conflict. This advice was met with growing resentment among human leaders, who began to question the Council's purpose and effectiveness. Efforts to rally support among allied species yielded mixed results. While many weaker civilizations sympathized with humanity's plight, they lacked the means to oppose the Empire. Others, particularly those with long-standing rivalries or trade dependencies on the aggressors, refused to act. Humanity found itself increasingly isolated, its calls for justice ignored or dismissed by those with the power to make a difference. As the aggressors continued their incursions, humanity's warnings to the Council grew more urgent. Their representatives made it clear that failure to act decisively would force humanity to take matters into their own hands. These warnings were met with skepticism, as the Council underestimated humanity's capacity for decisive action. To them, humans were too new, too restrained, and too reliant on diplomacy to pose a significant threat to the established order. The aggressors, emboldened by the Council's indifference, and convinced of humanity's unwillingness to retaliate, escalated their provocations further. They attacked key human trade routes, destroyed a research outpost, and issued a declaration warning humanity against opposing their expansion. These actions marked a critical turning point, pushing humanity's patience to its limits. For years, humans had adhered to the principles of diplomacy, working tirelessly to foster cooperation and uphold galactic stability. But the Council's apathy, combined with the aggressors' blatant disregard for any semblance of restraint, left them with no choice. Humanity's restraint, once their defining trait on the interstellar stage, had been stretched to its breaking point. Their warnings to the Council had not been bluster, they were a promise. The galaxy was about to see what happened when humanity lost patience. The aggression from the Empire intensified, each act more brazen than the last. Human trade convoys were ambushed and destroyed without warning, their crews left to die in the cold void. Strategic colonies, once thriving hubs of development, were targeted with surgical strikes that devastated infrastructure and left survivors in dire straits. The Empire's actions were deliberate, aimed not just at weakening humanity's resources but at testing their resolve. Humanity, still pursuing every diplomatic avenue, brought undeniable evidence of these provocations before the Galactic Council. Their representatives laid out a clear case. The Empire's unchecked aggression was not just a threat to humanity but a destabilizing force for the entire galaxy. They argued that the Empire's actions would only embolden other opportunistic factions, setting a precedent for further chaos. Yet, the Council's response remained unchanged. Speeches were given, resolutions drafted, and debates ensued, but no decisive action was taken. Among the more powerful members of the Council, the prevailing sentiment was one of indifference cloaked in caution. Some viewed the conflict as a matter for humanity to resolve independently, unwilling to expend their resources on what they saw as a localized issue. Others, with covert economic ties to the Empire, actively worked to stall any motions for intervention. Humanity's allies, though sympathetic, lacked the influence or military strength to sway the Council's decisions. The Empire, meanwhile, interpreted the Council's inaction as a tacit endorsement of their actions. Their leaders issued proclamations mocking humanity's appeals for justice, painting humans as weak and powerless. Propaganda broadcasts from the Empire declared their dominance inevitable, portraying humanity's reliance on diplomacy as a sign of cowardice. These taunts spread across the galaxy, fueling speculation that humanity was on the brink of collapse. Within human leadership circles, frustration boiled over into anger. Diplomatic channels had failed at every turn, leaving humanity increasingly isolated. The repeated dismissals by the Council, coupled with the Empire's blatant provocations, made it clear that the rules humanity had abided by held no weight in the current galactic order. As discussions turned toward action, a single truth became undeniable. If humanity was to survive, it could no longer rely on the systems that had failed to protect it. The breaking point came when a critical human colony, a vibrant, self-sustaining world on the frontier, was attacked without warning. The Empire's forces bombarded its cities from orbit, reducing them to rubble in hours. Millions of civilians were killed or displaced, and the survivors were left to fend for themselves as the Empire withdrew, leaving nothing but devastation in their wake. For humanity, this was not just an attack, it was a declaration of open war. The patience that had defined their diplomacy was gone, replaced by a grim determination. Humanity issued one final statement to the Galactic Council, a message stark in its brevity. They reiterated their warnings. The Council's refusal to act had allowed the aggressors to escalate unchecked. They declared that humanity would no longer wait for permission to defend itself, or its allies. It was not a request for aid, nor was it a plea for understanding. It was a simple acknowledgement of reality. Humanity would act alone if necessary, regardless of the Council's approval or disapproval. The Council dismissed the message as posturing, failing to grasp the gravity of the shift that had occurred. The Empire, emboldened by its apparent victories, scoffed at humanity's resolve, mocking the idea that this younger species could pose any real threat. What neither the Council nor the Empire realized was that humanity's restraint had never been born of weakness. It had been a choice, one made out of respect for a system they had hoped to improve. Now, that choice had been taken from them. In the days that followed, humanity began mobilizing on a scale that caught the attention of even its staunchest critics. Fleets long held in reserve emerged from hidden shipyards, armed with weapons and technologies developed in secret. Colonies once thought unremarkable were revealed as hubs of advanced research and military preparation. Intelligence networks, cultivated quietly over years, came alive, providing precise data on the Empire's movements and vulnerabilities. The scale of the mobilization was unprecedented, and its efficiency spoke to years of planning. The galaxy watched with a mix of curiosity and unease as humanity prepared for a response that would soon redefine its place among the stars. While the Council remained paralyzed by its internal divisions, whispers began to spread among the smaller species, rumors of human capabilities, of weapons and strategies that defied conventional understanding. These whispers carried an undercurrent of hope for those oppressed by the Empire and fear for those who underestimated humanity's resolve. Humanity made no grand declarations as their forces moved into position. There were no proclamations of war, no pleas for support. Instead, their silence carried its own weight, a calm before a storm that was about to shatter the fragile balance of the galaxy. For too long, they had waited for others to act, believing in the promise of collective security and justice. Now, they would show the galaxy what happened when that patience was exhausted. The Empire had pushed too far, and the response would be swift, decisive, and unforgettable. The first human strikes against the Empire were swift, devastating, and meticulously planned. Without fanfare or prior warning, humanity's fleets emerged from strategic locations and launched a coordinated assault that left the Empire scrambling to respond. Their initial targets were key logistical hubs, supply depots, and communication relays, critical points in the Empire's sprawling infrastructure. In a matter of hours, entire sectors found themselves cut off from reinforcements, their supply lines severed and fleets stranded. The galaxy, accustomed to the slower, more predictable warfare of larger factions, was unprepared for the sheer speed and precision of humanity's attacks. Human fleets utilized advanced propulsion systems, making them far more maneuverable than their Empire counterparts. Their weaponry, honed through years of research, included guided munitions and adaptive energy weapons that rendered the Empire's defenses obsolete. What shocked observers most, however, was the cold efficiency with which humanity executed their plans. There was no wasted effort, no hesitation, just a relentless drive to dismantle the Empire's capacity to wage war. For the Empire, the losses were catastrophic. Their forces, accustomed to overwhelming their enemies through sheer numbers and firepower, found themselves unable to adapt to humanity's unconventional tactics. Human commanders avoided direct confrontations unless the odds were overwhelmingly in their favor, preferring to strike where the Empire was weakest. This approach created a cascading effect, as the Empire's inability to respond decisively led to further vulnerabilities. Planetary garrisons, once thought impenetrable, fell without significant resistance as their supply chains collapsed. The psychological impact of these defeats rippled through both the Empire and the wider galaxy. The Empire's leadership, long accustomed to unchecked dominance, was forced to confront a foe that neither feared them nor adhered to the conventional rules of engagement. Their propaganda, which had mocked humanity as weak and indecisive, quickly turned hollow in the face of mounting losses. For the first time, doubt began to seep into their ranks, eroding the confidence that had been their greatest strength. Among the allied species and neutral observers, humanity's actions sparked a mix of admiration and apprehension. Stories of their tactics spread rapidly, accounts of how entire fleets vanished in coordinated ambushes, or how human soldiers utilized terrain and strategy to outwit larger, better-equipped forces. Many viewed humanity as a liberating force, standing against an empire that had terrorized the galaxy for too long. Others, however, were unnerved by the ruthlessness with which humans dismantled their enemies, wondering what would happen if that power were ever turned elsewhere. Despite their rapid successes, humanity's campaign was not without cost. Every victory required immense coordination, and the strain on their forces was significant. Human soldiers faced grueling conditions, often fighting in hostile environments where retreat was not an option. Casualties mounted, but unlike the Empire, humanity had prepared for this reality. Their forces operated with a clear understanding of the stakes, driven by a singular purpose: to end the Empire's reign of terror once and for all. The Empire's attempts to retaliate were met with calculated resistance. Human fleets, guided by advanced intelligence networks, anticipated their every move. Attempts to regroup and launch counteroffensives were disrupted before they could gain traction. Infiltration teams targeted key decision-makers within the Empire, spreading chaos and misinformation that further undermined their ability to respond. The result was a series of missteps and failures that only deepened the Empire's losses. As humanity's momentum grew, they began to turn their attention to the Empire's occupied territories. Liberating these regions became a central part of their campaign, both to weaken the Empire further and to provide aid to those who had suffered under their rule. On liberated worlds, human forces worked to restore basic infrastructure and ensure the safety of civilians. This approach earned them the loyalty of many species, who came to see humanity as a force for justice and protection. The galaxy watched in awe as the tide of the war shifted entirely in humanity's favor. The Empire, once an unstoppable juggernaut, was now on the defensive, retreating from territories they had held for decades. For humanity, however, the war was far from over. Each victory brought new challenges, as the Empire's remaining forces consolidated in their core systems, preparing for a last-ditch effort to hold on to power. Humanity's leaders, aware of the risks of overextending their forces, continued to balance aggression with strategic restraint. They knew that while their tactics had been successful so far, the Empire's desperation could lead to unpredictable and dangerous responses. Yet, despite the risks, humanity showed no signs of wavering. The patience they had once displayed was gone, replaced by an unshakable resolve to see the conflict through to its conclusion. The Empire's leadership, facing internal dissent and dwindling resources, struggled to maintain control. Their efforts to rally their forces were hampered by the growing perception that humanity was an unstoppable force. This perception was not just fueled by humanity's victories but by the precision and decisiveness with which they achieved them. It became clear to all that humanity was not simply fighting a war, they were reshaping the galaxy's understanding of power and what it meant to stand against oppression. As the campaign continued, the lines between victory and legacy began to blur. Humanity's actions were not just dismantling an empire, they were redefining the galaxy's expectations of what a determined species could accomplish. The message was clear: humanity's patience was finite, but their capacity for action, once unleashed, was limitless. For the Empire, this realization came too late. For the galaxy, it was a lesson that would not soon be forgotten. The final stages of the conflict marked humanity's transition from relentless combatant to decisive architect of a new galactic order. With the Empire's infrastructure in disarray and their forces scattered, the focus shifted from dismantling their power to ensuring that the chaos they had wrought would not return. Humanity, having already demonstrated its capacity for destruction, now sought to reshape the aftermath of the war with the same precision and determination that had defined their military campaign. The collapse of the Empire's command structure created a vacuum that threatened to destabilize the liberated regions. Entire systems, once governed under the iron grip of the Empire, faced the prospect of anarchy. Recognizing the risks, humanity immediately deployed stabilization forces to key locations. These efforts were not merely acts of charity, they were calculated steps to prevent any resurgence of the Empire's influence, or opportunistic factions from exploiting the power vacuum. Human engineers, diplomats, and soldiers worked in concert to rebuild what had been destroyed. Infrastructure critical to survival, power grids, water supplies, transportation networks, was restored with remarkable speed. These actions earned humanity the trust and gratitude of many species who had long suffered under the Empire's rule. For these populations, humanity's presence was a stark contrast to the oppression they had endured, and their assistance planted the seeds of new alliances. Despite these efforts, the memory of humanity's uncompromising tactics loomed large. While many saw them as liberators, others feared the precedent their actions had set. The same ruthlessness that had brought the Empire to its knees could, if turned elsewhere, become a threat to any species. This dual perception of humanity, as both savior and potential dominator, began to define their place in the galaxy. The Galactic Council, faced with the undeniable shift in power dynamics, was forced to acknowledge its own failures. Their prolonged inaction had allowed the Empire's rise and the subsequent devastation. Now, in the wake of humanity's victories, the Council scrambled to remain relevant. Proposals for reform were hastily drafted, focusing on decentralizing authority and creating mechanisms to prevent future abuses of power. These measures, while well-intentioned, came too late to salvage the Council's credibility in the eyes of many. Humanity's response to these efforts was measured but firm. They refused to integrate fully into the Council's reformed structure, citing its systemic inefficiencies and the repeated failures that had necessitated unilateral action. Instead, humanity proposed a framework for cooperation that emphasized mutual respect and sovereignty. They made it clear that while they were willing to collaborate on matters of galactic importance, they would not subordinate their interests to a body that had proven incapable of decisive leadership. This stance sent ripples through the galaxy, reinforcing humanity's image as a force that valued independence above all else. Smaller species, inspired by humanity's refusal to be constrained by traditional systems, began to advocate for greater autonomy within the Council. Others, particularly those who had benefited from the status quo, viewed humanity's position as a challenge to the established order. These conflicting reactions underscored the profound impact humanity's actions had on interstellar politics. For the remnants of the Empire, the consequences were absolute. Their leadership, stripped of power and influence, either surrendered or fled into obscurity. Their territories, once symbols of domination, were divided among liberated populations, with humanity overseeing the transition to ensure stability. The Empire's defeat was not merely a military victory but a statement that no power, no matter how entrenched, was immune to accountability. As the dust settled, humanity turned its focus inward. The cost of the war had been immense, and the sacrifices made by their people weighed heavily on their leaders. Entire fleets had been decimated, and the loss of life was staggering. Rebuilding their own systems became a priority, even as they continued to play a pivotal role in stabilizing the galaxy. This balance between reconstruction and engagement highlighted humanity's ability to navigate complex challenges with pragmatism and foresight. The legacy of humanity's actions became a defining topic of discussion across the galaxy. For many, it was a testament to the power of resolve and the importance of standing against injustice. For others, it served as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked militarization and the fine line between liberation and dominance. These debates ensured that humanity's impact would not be forgotten, shaping the narratives and policies of future generations. In the end, humanity's decision to act when others faltered reshaped the galaxy in ways that few could have anticipated. They demonstrated that patience, while valuable, must have its limits, and that decisive action, though costly, can create the conditions for lasting change. The moment humanity lost patience became a turning point, not just for them but for the entire galaxy, a reminder that strength, when wielded with purpose, has the power to redefine history. Humanity's actions during the war left an indelible mark on the galaxy, both in the immediate aftermath and in the long-term shifts they triggered. Their approach, driven by necessity and executed with relentless precision, reshaped the dynamics of power, forcing every species to reevaluate their place in the interstellar order. The Empire's fall was absolute, but the consequences of humanity's intervention went far beyond military victory. For the liberated territories, the end of the Empire marked the beginning of an uncertain future. While humanity's stabilization efforts provided critical support, rebuilding shattered economies and restoring governance were monumental tasks. Formerly oppressed species, once united by their shared suffering under the Empire, now faced the challenge of creating equitable systems of self-rule. Humanity facilitated these transitions where possible, but their involvement was careful, ensuring they did not impose their will on those they had freed. This delicate balance earned humanity respect from many corners of the galaxy, but it also highlighted the complexities of their position. By refusing to exploit their newfound power, humanity solidified their image as principled actors. However, this restraint also fueled suspicions among certain factions that humanity's reluctance to dominate might be a calculated strategy to garner trust while consolidating strength. This dual perception ensured that humanity remained both admired and cautiously watched. The Galactic Council, struggling to maintain relevance, initiated sweeping reforms in response to the war. They proposed decentralizing authority, streamlining decision-making processes, and creating rapid response frameworks to address future crises. While these changes were widely regarded as necessary, they were also seen as reactive, a desperate attempt to recover credibility lost during the conflict. Humanity, while supportive of the general direction of these reforms, made it clear that their role would remain one of selective engagement rather than full integration into the Council's structure. This position created ripples across the galaxy. Smaller species, inspired by humanity's independence, began advocating for similar autonomy within the Council, challenging the dominance of its larger members. Larger factions, wary of humanity's growing influence, sought to counterbalance it by forming alliances of their own. These shifts introduced a new era of interstellar politics, one defined by decentralization and fluid power dynamics. For humanity, the war's legacy was both a point of pride and a reminder of the costs of leadership. The sacrifices made by their soldiers and civilians were etched into their collective memory, shaping cultural narratives that emphasized resilience and the necessity of taking decisive action when all else fails. Monuments were erected, and stories of the war became central to humanity's identity, serving as both cautionary tales and celebrations of their ability to rise to unprecedented challenges. Beyond their internal reckoning, humanity's influence extended into areas they had not directly intended. Their demonstration of military and logistical superiority led to widespread emulation by other species. Smaller powers began adopting human tactics, while larger ones sought to match their technological advancements. This unintentional arms race introduced a new layer of complexity to galactic affairs, as species sought to protect themselves against future threats, whether external or from humanity itself. The philosophical impact of humanity's actions was equally significant. Their decision to act unilaterally, defying both the Empire and the Galactic Council, challenged long-held assumptions about interstellar governance. The idea that collective decision-making was the only path to stability had been shattered. Humanity's success proved that decisive action, even when taken independently, could achieve results that bureaucratic systems could not. This realization forced many to reconsider their reliance on outdated structures, spurring debates about sovereignty, cooperation, and the limits of patience. Amid these shifts, humanity's focus remained clear: rebuilding their own systems while continuing to engage selectively with the galaxy. Their refusal to overreach or impose dominance reinforced their credibility as a stabilizing force, but it also left unanswered questions about their ultimate ambitions. For many, humanity's restraint was proof of their maturity as a species. For others, it was a sign that they were biding their time, waiting for the right moment to assert their full potential. The moment humanity lost patience became a defining chapter in galactic history, not just for the victory it achieved but for the changes it set in motion. It was a reminder that even the most powerful systems are vulnerable to the actions of a determined few, and that strength, when guided by principle, can achieve what diplomacy alone cannot. Humanity's legacy was one of both hope and caution, a testament to the power of resolve and a warning to those who might mistake patience for weakness.